Stepped out of my zone. I had to get out all alone and figure it out on my own. And I know what I really want now. Can't stop me, can't break me. But don't kill me, don't make me. Shoot for the stars, don't save me. And now I see clear in HD. Gotta go hard, gotta go hard. I ain't got time to waste. I ain't got time. I gotta go high, gotta go high. I gotta elevate, I gotta elevate. They wanna fight, they wanna fight. I'm just gonna let them hate. I'm just gonna let them hate. I gotta go high, gotta go high. I gotta elevate, I gotta elevate. You gotta choose a side, you gotta choose a side. You gotta pick, you gotta do what's right. Or you gonna lose the fight. You gotta go hard. You gotta choose a side, you gotta choose a side. You gotta pick, you gotta do what's right.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good to see you guys. If you are new here with us, my name is John Wagler, and I'm part of this Hill City team. And so thankful that you decided to join us here on this Sunday morning as we are in week 2 of this series called Take the Stairs. I'm also a marketing piece today. We have new gear, and whenever we get new gear, I wear something up here. So we got new shirts if you guys would want one on your way out. If you just go in the lounge area, they're over there. So I love, like when I go to the gym, it's pretty cool. I always see like Hill City shirts there, and so it's always fun to just see all the marketing that's happening, like even at the gym. Anyway, so glad that you're here. We're in this series, and here's why. A couple of different reasons. First one is this, that we are talking about movement, movement of people, movement in our lives, movement of what it takes to have a movement in us, and in particularly movement physically, emotionally, spiritually, and relationally. And that's what this series is all about for the next several weeks here together. But the second thing is this, that this line that you're going to hear every single week that came from, it's my daughter's favorite quote, and she's the one who kind of brought it up to me, but she said that her favorite quote is this, that there is no elevator to success, that we need to take the stairs. And so we want to take time to go over this, and here's why. At any point that you want to be healthy, and I don't care if that's relationally, emotionally, spiritually, or physically, you have to do the work to get there. It doesn't just happen, that there takes time, and there's no easy route to get there. And so for us, what we want to do is we want to start exploring over this series. What are some of the things that actually are taking us away from experiencing healthy relationships and being healthy emotionally and healthy spiritually and healthy physically? What are the things that end up taking us away from that? And so last week we talked about complaining and having a complaining spirit and why that was so difficult, and that the antidote to that is actually checking our attitudes. And then this week we want to talk about discipline. We want to talk about discipline. How many guys have, that's not your favorite word, discipline? Anyone love discipline? How about that? Anyone just love discipline? Yeah, I feel like there's this like wide spectrum of discipline, isn't there? By the way, if you have a lack of discipline, that's your discipline, just FYI. But like there's this wide spectrum when it comes to discipline. We've got this folks that are like, man, they are all in everything they do. They are so regimented with their food and their sleep and their exercise, and they read the Bible every day. They pray, like they're so disciplined. And then you've got kind of the other side to where it's like you can't convince anyone to do anything that's discipline oriented, right? Like there's this wide spectrum that happens, but we all have disciplines that take us somewhere. Like our disciplines that we have in our lives, they determine, again, and this could be lack of discipline as well, but our disciplines or lack of discipline will actually determine the path or the direction that we go. And so discipline becomes so important when we're looking at these 4 big things about what we want to get healthy with and what it takes to do so. When I think about discipline, I'm pretty good in some areas, and in some areas I'm good with pretty good with eating to the most part, except for sweets. But I will say this: I discovered last night that I actually have a really good discipline with sweets in terms of how I approach them. We were at a wedding reception, and I realized that I'm always disciplined to not get the cake the first round because I know the second round's better because they discover they have a lot of leftover cake. And so I'm very disciplined and not jumping to the first one where they kind of skimp you on the pieces, but then they realize, oh, we've got enough here. That's where you get the nice solid corner piece. And so we got disciplines there, but our disciplines take us somewhere. I was reading this quote a week or 2 ago that I thought was really good, and it said this, that self-discipline is the ability to do what you should do, when you should do it, whether you feel like it or not. And so discipline matters. Discipline is, I actually think it's something that we often push to certain kinds of people when I do believe that there's a reality that we should all be disciplined. And so I want to take a look at a person in the Bible who is incredibly disciplined, and his name's Daniel. And so if you aren't familiar with the Bible, Daniel, we find him in what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scripture, and we get to learn a lot about the people of Israel and God's chosen people and kind of their story. And this guy named Daniel was a part of that. He was a leader and became actually a prophet of God and to kind of share the word of God. He had this ability to interpret dreams and some different things that happened to him. But he was in a time frame where we discover that the Babylonian Empire had captured Jerusalem and really brought in the Israelites, put them back into captivity, back into slavery, and were living as exiles. And this guy named Nebuchadnezzar, who was king at the time, did something really interesting. And it was smart, actually. He took the best of the best from the Israelites, and they were in particular the young folks, and he used them. He got them. He goes, "Hey, go find the best of the best, bring them in here." And here's what he did: he started indoctrinating them with the things of the Babylonians, and started to try and kind of strip them of their culture, of the things that made them God's people. And so they changed their names. He made them study what they studied, and tried to really get them out of the things that made them God's people. And so Daniel has this fascinating story. Him and in particular his friends, again, some of you guys know this, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were people that stood up with courage and had some pretty powerful moments happen with God in the midst of this kind of time of exile. And in a time where not everyone would have done what they would have done. In a time where life was throwing all this stuff at them, but somehow they stayed strong and disciplined in what they were doing. So I want to look at actually a pretty famous story called Daniel when he gets thrown into the lion's den. And several decades have passed since Nebuchadnezzar was the king, and this guy named Darius is now kind of running everything. And I want us to look at a part of this story because until about 6 or 7 months ago, I think it was, where I was reading this, and then I heard actually someone else talk about it too. There was this one line in there that I just have never noticed before, and I glossed over, because whenever we tell this story about Daniel in the lion's den, we tell the story in a way, in particular, like with kids, like we tell the story because they love this story of like, oh, he's with the lions, and God shuts the mouths of the lions and everything, and the kids are like, oh, God can do that. We're like, yes, God can do that, right? Like that's like how we tell the story. But there's this other part of this story that, again, I've glossed over all the times that I've ever heard it, but I think is actually critical to the entire story about discipline and how Daniel was actually able to experience God. So Daniel chapter 6 says this: Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise the high officers and protect the king's interests. Daniel soon proved himself more capable, that's important, than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, that's important, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. They said he was faithful, responsible, completely trustworthy. Wouldn't we love that in our own government? And he says this: so they concluded our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. So here's what happens. These guys get together. They're super jealous of him. And they're trying to figure out a way of like, man, Daniel's getting all this, he's getting moved up. He's like the right-hand man of Darius. He's got all this responsibility, and we're trying to find fault in him, but we can't. He's just so legit. He's so capable. He's so trustworthy. He's so responsible. He's so faithful, but somehow we got to take him down. And so they decide to figure out, we know he's so into his belief in his God, and so maybe there's a way there. And so they draft this law that would have been in place that essentially, in the simplistic form, is that if you worshipped another God besides what Darius wanted the folks to do, that what would end up happening is you would get thrown into jail. And you would get thrown into the lion's den to end up being killed. And so they get this law in place, and they know that they can get Daniel on this. And so in verse 10, it says this: but when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home, and get this, this is the phrase right here. He went home and knelt down as usual. All right, so if you take notes or you're whatever, underline that part. Knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he'd always done, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. So now this happens. So Daniel's in trouble. He's going to get thrown into the lion's den. And Darius is in this weird spot because he loves Daniel. Daniel has proved himself to be such an incredible advocate for Darius and has been his right-hand man and helps everything go in the kingdom. And so Darius loves Daniel, but he also understands that this law was put in place and he had backed it up. And so he's incredibly fearful of what's going to happen. So Darius, feeling like just bad about everything, he says this to Daniel. At one point he says, actually, let me say this first. He actually goes and he fasts all night. So Darius is just so worried about what's going to happen to Daniel that he goes and he fasts all night, doesn't do any of the kind of typical celebrations and customary things that they would normally do. He removes himself from this. And again, Darius does not believe in the same God that Daniel does, okay? And so then he says this at one point. He goes, Daniel, did your king save you? Because Daniel gets thrown into the lion's den. They seal it up, and he comes back and he goes, Daniel, did your king save you? And here's Daniel's response. In verse 21, he says, long live the king. I think if we were writing this right now, it would be more like this. Let's go, right? Like he would be like so excited that he's still alive. He says, my God sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth so that they would not hurt me. For I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. Then King Darius sent his message of the people, every race and nation and language throughout the world. Peace and prosperity to you. And this is crazy, y'all. He says, I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed. His rule will never end. He rescues and saves his people. He performs miraculous signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So get this. Someone who is running the whole entire kingdom that does not believe in the God of Daniel, respects Daniel so much and sees what Daniel's God does that his only response could be to tell everyone else they should fear that God. I can't make you do anything, but you need to fear this God because he rescues his people. He comes through for his people. Can you imagine that if every person has said they followed Jesus, can you imagine that the only response that someone who doesn't follow Jesus has is, I don't know what's going on with those people right there that say they follow Jesus. I don't know. I'm not even so sure I believe in their Jesus, but I'll tell you this, their Jesus does something. So much so that I'm telling you, look, I don't know, I can't make you believe in this Jesus, but my gosh, there's something to this Jesus, because when those Christians pray, some crazy stuff happens. When those Christians get involved, some unbelievable things happen. When those Christians, it's unbelievable because when they get involved, it's very different when it's just us. It set them apart. It changed everything. And Daniel, in his discipline, Daniel, in the way he approached his life, Daniel was opened up into all these different opportunities. And so it becomes important for us then to start thinking this part through. Like, how am I like Daniel? How am I disciplined? How am I engaging the culture around me? How am I engaging the people around me? Would they ever have this thought, man, I want to worship, or I want to pray to, or I want to know more about this Jesus thing you say you follow? Or would they say something like, it's cool that you go to church, it's cool that you say you're a Christian, but I feel like we're the same, right? See, what we see in Daniel is through his discipline, something else begins to happen. So I want to highlight just 2 things here this morning in this passage that I feel important. Here's the first one when it comes to discipline. In order to have great discipline, you have to know who you are. You have to know who you are. See, Daniel not only knew who he hoped to be, but he knew whose he was. All right, so I think it's important right off the top when we talk about discipline, when we talk about identity, when we talk about all these things, Daniel was so secure. They're like, strip me of my name, I don't care. I'm good. I know whose I am. Try and put us in captivity, I don't care. I'm good. Strip us of our ability to do what we want to do to worship God, I don't care. I'm good. Why? Because I know who I am. I know where my identity is placed. And so for Daniel, that's why it was so much easier for him to be disciplined. Because he understood who he was. He understood whose he was. Everything changed that way for Daniel. And so even when we think about who we hope to be, it becomes important because if we don't know who we are, then we'll never be able to discover or figure out who we hope to be. So if we kind of start thinking through relationships and physical stuff and emotional stuff and spiritual stuff, and I ask you, who do you hope to be? You might have an answer, but you can't fully discover who you hope to be until you understand who you are. And more importantly, whose you are. And so this identity piece becomes so critical to all of this. And so Daniel understands who he is. And then the end result is this discipline starts happening. He's so disciplined in everything he does. So disciplined. And then the part that when I told you that I typically gloss over in the story, that I think is so important, and I think gets lost in the story, is there in verse 10 when he says that he knelt down as usual. Understand this. The people of the Israelites had been in captivity, had been enslaved for decades at that point. Not a few days, not a few weeks, like for decades. And you understand this. Daniel, as usual, meaning he did this every day, went down, knelt down 3 times a day, looked out his window to see Jerusalem, because this was customary of those of God's people. And the reason they would look to Jerusalem was this, because they always believed and hoped that God would restore his kingdom. So get this, for decades, that has been stripped away. Gone. Absolutely gone. And here's Daniel being like, I'm going to be so disciplined. You can take away whatever you want. You can put whatever law you want in place. But I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to get down on my knees. I'm going to pray to my God. I'm going to say, God, I know you're going to restore your kingdom. Here's what's crazy about this. When Jesus preaches, what did he preach the most about? His kingdom. His followers would want to build his kingdom on this earth. That his followers would be so disciplined in building his kingdom. So disciplined that was like what you centered your life on. That anyone who followed Jesus, your life is centered on building his kingdom. All right, so there's this translation that's woven in from Daniel all the way through what Jesus would actually teach. And so this discipline that Daniel had is phenomenal because he understood who he was. And even in the midst when life started just throwing all of this stuff at him, relationships gone, like they try to interrupt like his healthy eating habits, right? And he was like, no, I got my discipline with my health. Do whatever you want. I'm going to prove to you. Oh, you want to strip away kind of our ability to have freedom and stuff? No problem. I'm good. I'm good spiritually. I'm healthy that way. Oh, emotionally, you want to put some stuff on me, throw me in the lion's den? It's all right. You can throw whatever you want at me. Why? Well, I'm disciplined enough to understand my identity, whose I am. So when we think about discipline, I think there are a few things to highlight with discipline. That discipline sets us up for transformation. Discipline sets us up for transformation. We will never be able to fully change until we're disciplined to do so. We can pray about it, and we should. We can hope for it, and we should. We can believe God can do a miracle, and we should. But there's also a reality that even when you think about some of the miracles of Jesus, there was some discipline, there was some responsibility of people around them for allowing things to happen. And so even when you kind of process what you want to see change in your life, so that you can be more capable, you can be more trustworthy, you can be the kind of person that people are looking to as like such a great example of how to live a life. Like you've got to be disciplined to do so. Why? Because it creates room for transformation to actually happen. This is what was going on with Daniel. So that transformation started happening in him, right? And through his identity and who he found his identity in, that isn't it interesting? Then the transformation started happening around people outside of him. So your discipline not only impacts you, but it impacts other people around you. And guess what else that means? Our lack of discipline not only impacts us, but it impacts the people around us. And so this discipline piece really matters when it comes to transformation. Discipline also allows God to grab us. Allows God to grab us. I love the fact that Daniel is so disciplined that in what could be facing his own death, there was just a sense of, he's like, I'm good, I'm going to keep praying, I'm not worried about it. Now, could he have died? Sure. Now, the end result is God had him that way too. But the reality is, as Daniel approaches this, and he allows God to move in him. Why? Because he had set up his life to understand that, guess what? God is in every moment, even when it's terrible. His presence is around us, even when it's, like, listen, y'all. God does not require us to invite him in for him to be present. Like, even when we do stuff like this, God, we just welcome you into this place today. He's like, I'm already here, right? You don't welcome me into anything, right? Like, you're in my house, right? Like, so it's like, even the way that we think about those things, we got to understand that God's presence is always here. It's always around us. Yes, even when things go south, like viciously so, like, we've got to understand that his presence is still with us. Now, whether or not we want to engage that is a whole other thing. But see, when Daniel opens himself up to be disciplined, to create space, to create room for God to do work, it ends up allowing him to grab us and understanding that the presence of God is around us. So no matter what you're going through, we have the opportunity to engage the presence of God, even when it feels like we don't. You know, I think when you even process what Daniel's kind of working through in this moment, I don't know, we don't learn this part about Daniel. We only know like the good parts. I don't know if he doubted at any point. We don't know those things. But at some point I have to wonder, like, did he ever think, would it be easier to kind of go the Babylonian route? Just kind of just buy into this? Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was just so disciplined and so like kind of steady in who he was, and it seems that way. But I think here's what happens to us. We have these opportunities to be resilient. We have these opportunities to have courage. We have these opportunities to be strong in scenarios, and we cower away sometimes because of a lack of discipline. We haven't set things up correctly in our lives to be able to handle some things that might get thrown at us. And here's what I think also happens sometimes. Sometimes we have this kind of American dream set before us, right? Get whatever you want. You can be happy. Chase. You'll be the best at everything, right? Like, that's kind of, you can be anything you want. It's like what we lie to our kids all the time. Like, you be anything you want, right? And so like, they can't. Like, there's some things you just can't be, right? Like, so, but like we say all these things. We create these dreams in front of us, and all these big American dreams. It looks so shiny. Man, we get so disciplined towards that, don't we? We allow that to shape everything that we have. And I think a question that we all should think about is, am I more disciplined with the American dream than I am with the teachings of Jesus? See, when we are more disciplined with the American dream, when things don't go our way, that's why it becomes problematic. That's why we lose hope. That's why we lose faith. That's why we begin doubting so much. That's why we get so fearful. That's why we start trying to run away from God. When things don't go our way, because that's not the way it's supposed to be. We even try bringing the American dream into our faith in Jesus. Like, we read Scripture through that lens, don't we? Well, you mean if I just do this, that God's going to bless me with this? Sometimes it's not the way it works. Actually, God just asks us to be obedient. And guess what? Even in our obedience, sometimes life sucks. But in those moments, do we trust God enough and trust His presence enough? Are we disciplined enough to allow God to grab us in those moments? The third thing with discipline is that discipline gives us courage. That's what I love, what we see with Daniel. He's so consistent. Isn't it wonderful to be around consistent people? Like, it's so great. Like, you know what you're getting. You know they're good when things are good and bad, whatever. Like, when they're consistent people and so disciplined, like, it's so good to be around folks like that. And so Daniel is so consistent. He's so disciplined in what he's doing. And here's the thing about consistency that I think becomes problematic. Sometimes we start doing the right disciplines in our life, and we get really disciplined, we get really consistent, and we don't have the results that we want just yet. We're like, no, I want to get to here. I know who I want to be, and I want to get to there, and I am being consistent. I am being disciplined, but I'm just not there yet. And here's what I would say to that your current results are less important than the trajectory of your future. So like when you start thinking about your disciplines and where they're taking you, because those small steps have like compound interest, okay? Like, listen, y'all, like if you have unhealthy relationships, you didn't get there by accident. Our unhealthy relationships, we get there on purpose. The unhealth we might have physically, outside of an extreme scenario, right? Like some kind of autoimmune disease or something that comes on you in some kind of way that you could do nothing to prevent. Like outside of that kind of the extreme scenario, when we're unhealthy physically, we got there by the things we choose to do or not do. When we're unhealthy emotionally, we get there because we choose to do so. And so we make these choices all the time on whether or not we want to move towards things that can make us healthier, or we end up moving away. And I get it. Sometimes it's super hard. And sometimes there's things we can't control and all of that, but we still make choices in the midst of it. And so it's about, man, is this trajectory? I know where I want to get to, and it might take you years to get there. It just might. But man, the future is so much more important than the results right now. And so those things, I think, when you think through, all right, so Daniel had that kind of consistency, that discipline and everything. That also meant, and this is kind of the second part to this, and I'm just going to do this quickly, in that we have to form good habits. So we have to know who we are, and we have to form good habits. Now, there are great books to read on habits. I'm not going to go through all the stuff around habits. If you read Atomic Habits or Your Future Self Will Thank You or The Power of Habit, any of those three are wonderful books on discipline and habits to kind of build into our lives. But when we think about good habits, we've got to understand this, that 40 to 45% of the things you do and I do every single day they're just habits. We don't even think about it. We just do it. And so I know we think we do a lot of things, but the reality is we don't. Like half of our days are spent just doing things that are habits to us. And so now the question is, are they good or bad habits? Of course. But that's just the reality of how we kind of go about our lives. And so establishing good habits only happen when we're disciplined. And so learning how to form good habits becomes pivotal. And so here are just a few things around habits that I think are important. That habits are about forming new systems, not about goals. All right, so goals are cool. All right, they're good. Like if you set a lot of goals, that's cool. Like go ahead and do that. But if you don't have the systems in place to take you there, then you're just saying things, right? Like you're just like, man, you know what I'm going to do this year? What are you going to do there? Nothing. But I'm going to do that. That's my goal. You're like, how are you going to get there? I have no idea, right? So you're not going to magically get to that point. Like, so the idea of habits then is understanding it's not about goals. It's creating this new system and processes, new disciplines to get you into a healthy place. So if you want to be healthy spiritually, then establish a good system to get you there. Emotionally, physically, you need a good process and system, good habits to get you there. Now, is it all about disciplines and am I taking away like the work of the Spirit? No, I'm not taking away the work of the Spirit. I understand the way the Spirit of God works. And some of it's mystical and some of it's like incredible and it's surprising and there's wonder and there's awe to all. I am all in on all those things. But what I'm saying is we have to be consistent and disciplined and create systems and habits in our lives that actually allow us to experience God more. We need to be able to create things that allow God to be like, all right, you just opened that up for me there, I'm in. Can you imagine if in every area of our life, here's what we just started doing. God, I want to be so consistent and so disciplined in this area because I want to create space for you to do work here. And so that's why these things matter. That's why discipline actually matters in our lives. Habits create the space for self-control. Habits create the space for self-control, which self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. So there is like a spiritual aspect to this that ends up kind of getting played in. Again, we're creating space. We're creating space for God to do His fullest work inside of us. And then the last one here is that habits are best formed with strong community. It's just some things I want you to remember. So you want to be around people who are already establishing good systems and good habits. And so if you're saying to yourself, I want to be healthy in my relationships, don't go to the person who you look at their life and you're like, I would never want that. Like, don't be like, you know what? I'm trying to make all these changes. Now, how have you gone about your life, right? Like, don't do that. If you're trying to get healthy physically, like, look for people that, like, that's what they do. That's what they're disciplined in, like, and can help you out in those things, spiritually, emotionally, whatever it is. Find the people to be around. Why? Because when you're in strong community with people, what do? They push you. They help you. They're, in those moments where you don't want to because you're not as disciplined yet as you want to be, they're like, I got you. Come on. We're going to get there. I'm going to help you take this nice little next step. Let's go, right? It becomes pivotal in taking the next steps and understanding that this process starts happening. And guess what? Sometimes it's grueling. Sometimes you don't want to do it. Sometimes you hate that you had to keep doing it over and over and over again. Lacey hates going to the gym, okay? Hates it. Like whenever, like I'm like, wow, doesn't it just feel so good when you get back? She's like, no. I don't understand. But she understands that she has to do it to be healthy and to continue to exercise and everything, right? And so, but here's what happens, and this is just interesting about when you establish good discipline and good habits and how it relates to willpower. All right, so here's just kind of like a crazy thing about willpower and self-control. Some people are born with more willpower and self-control than others. Did you guys know that? We're all born with a certain amount. All right, so it's a fascinating part of kind of when they do studies on this stuff that we're born with. That's why some people, even at young ages, they have so much self-control towards something, and your other kid's crazy, right? You're just how does that work? You're from the same family, right? But that happens. So sometimes we're born with certain abilities for willpower and self-control, and there's different moments. There's static, which is moment to moment, and then you have a trait, which is what you're born with. Now, here's what's crazy about all this stuff. Let's just say going to church requires discipline and self-control and willpower for you to do so. Sundays happen and you're just my alarm just went off. I can't believe this. I'm using all the willpower to get myself there, right? And here's what ends up happening. This is why I just love how God kind of wires us. The things, and then what happens, you only have a certain amount of willpower in you. That's all you got. You got a certain amount where the more good habits you have in your life, the more your willpower increases, because the things you needed the willpower for, you no longer have to do because they're habits. So when Lacey hated going to the gym, guess what? Now it's a habit, so she doesn't need the willpower to do so. So now her willpower can be used to something else. So the same way happens with us spiritually and emotionally and relationally. And how does this all happen? Well, we are disciplined, we create good habits, and then God starts saying all right, here we go. Here we go. This is how I designed you to be. And so this happen. Now, here's the thing. None of this takes shape the way we want it to until we truly discover our identity and who we hope to be. It won't. You see, I think even when I talk about stuff like this, I realize that sometimes people can be oh, the discipline stuff, or oh, I want to get healthy, and you end up feeling bad about yourself, and you want to hate yourself, or whatever. Here's just what I wanted to say to that point. Because sometimes people will say things well, God just must be so disappointed in me. And I would say this: God is not disappointed in you. He's just really bummed out you forgot who you are. To understand how much He loves you, to understand how He created you, to understand He's got something so incredible for you to kind of discover purpose in this life. Yep, stuff happens. Yep, we make bad decisions. Yep, all those things. But here's what ends up happening. When we discover identity in God and when we just start knowing who we are or whose we are, here's what starts to happen. It becomes way harder to hate ourselves because we see ourselves in God so differently. It becomes way easier to discover who we hope to be because we see ourselves in God so differently. Discipline becomes a lot easier because we see who God hopes for us to be and we find our identity in Him. So when we kind of shake all of this out, do your disciplines actually take you in the direction of who you hope to be? Right? At the end of the day, that's what we're answering. In those areas you want to be healthy, do you have the things in place that will allow you to get there? Do you have the right identity and focus, or is it something else other than God? If you're new here with us, we take 2 minutes, about 2 minutes to think, where we'll put some questions up here on the screen, and we just want you to just think. I believe God speaks to us all the time. Now the question is whether or not we listen and take it in. But so we're going to take some time. We ask everyone to write answers to these questions. You can do it on paper or you can do it on your phone, whatever you want. But here are the three questions for this morning. Who do you hope to be? Spiritually, emotionally, physically, relationally. Number two, what discipline and habits do you have in place to get you there? And then number three, how are you daily acknowledging and appreciating and engaging the presence of God? So put 2 minutes up there, and then I will close us out in prayer. Will you guys pray with me? God, my greatest hope for everybody here is that they will find their identity in you. Throughout this series, we're going to talk a lot of things from complaining to discipline to shame to dark nights of the soul to living life on mission to phases of life and all these things that really require us to do hard work and take the stairs to being successful and healthy in all the areas that we've been discussing. But no matter what, the greatest hope for everyone is to find their identity in you. And so God, this morning, whatever area that we are discovering that isn't the case, whatever area relationally or spiritually or emotionally or physically or whatever it is that we're realizing I might lack discipline there, or consistency, or maybe I'm beating myself up over things because I'm placing my identity in the wrong places, or God, whatever the reasons are, I hope that we will discover a sense of peace and comfort in you. I hope that we will see that when we find our identity in you, it reshapes our purpose, it reshapes our vision, it allows us to kind of create some opportunities to experience life differently. And so, God, I just pray that that's what we're going to desire. And that as we begin to desire that, God, and want to have disciplines in place to do that, that we truly do start experiencing your presence every day and start becoming more aware of your presence, even in the little things of life. And lastly, God, I just want to pray for maybe anyone in here who's just struggling here this morning. You came in feeling a little broken, or maybe a lot broken, maybe discouraged. I hope, God, that they will just be reinstilled with a sense of hope. That they would be aware of your presence here with them. And that they would discover a strength in you and through you that they didn't have before they walked in. And so, God, we just thank you for the work that you do and how you created us and wired us to be. And God, ultimately, I pray that we will be people who really embrace and want discipline in our lives so that we can be resilient and courageous and stand up for what's right. In your name we pray. Everybody said? Amen. Hey, before you all get out of here, a couple quick things. We've got folks over here to pray with you. If you want anything in your life to pray for, again, relationally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, you want a miracle in your life, big decision coming up, they'd love to pray with you. If you want to talk to someone about practical next steps in your faith, go out to the lounge area. And the last thing is this. Thank you so much for your continued generosity in this church. It's really cool for us. We get just to help people all the time throughout the city, and it's because of your generosity. And I always say that what we're doing here, this is great, but like what we're doing throughout the weeks and the partnerships and everything that we have, it's really cool. It's going far beyond these walls, which is the point. And so our partner, we have a partner spotlight every week of every month. And so this month's partner spotlight is actually Youth Life Foundation. And so if you want to learn more about them, they do a lot of mentorship with kids and after-school programs and work with families as well, in particular in the North Side. And so if you would like to be a part of their organization or even learn more about them, they are on your way out to your right, right there in the corner, and they would love to speak with you and love to get you involved. Thank you guys so much for being here today. We will see you all next week.